Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. I think today we have 100% members. So I know each and every one of you. But thank you for your support to the DeKalb History Center. Today I want to introduce Kenneth H. Thomas Jr. He writes a weekly genealogy column in the Sunday Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which led to his interest in postcards. He is currently the president of the Georgia Postcard Club and will discuss postcard collecting and how our club, which will meet monthly in Decatur, now at the First Baptist Church. So with that, I'd like to turn it over.
Get some more new people that we didn't know. We got one couple here we have not met before, and one lady here. And I appreciate the rest of the folks coming, my next door neighbor, Mr. Drake, and several others club members. So we appreciate that. So this talk was devised, this particular lecture has been worked on for over 10 years. So it keeps morphing with more cards being added, more things. And the main thing is you have to think, well, what are people going to be interested in? So we're going to start off with the history of postcards. And start off with government postcards. At the government started, you notice on the left is a reproduction of the 1873 card that showed, people would use them, but most of the time it's used for business purposes. And then there's two other examples of government cards. The one on the lower right is a real tiny card. I put the dimensions in there, but it's hard to see it when you blow it up. But it's really much smaller than a normal postcard. Okay, so that's why it's there. And then the first U.S. picture postcard started in 1893 with the World's Fair in Chicago. Now, Europe had cards a little bit earlier than that, but that's the first American postcard. And the one on the left is actually a real one that was actually mailed from the Columbian Exposition. So it overlaps. A lot of our postcards can overlap different other interests. So I collect World's Fair cards as well as early examples of postcards. So this overlaps with my World's Fair interests. And I did get to go to two World's Fairs. And my mother got to go to one in 1939. So we had a sort of a family interest in World's Fairs. The lower part of the card down the right is that in Chicago, you can go to the site of the World's Fair and actually buy a reproduction of the cards. It folds out, a whole bunch of things. And the day I was there, and it's in Hyde Park in Chicago. I think it's Hyde Park, Highland Park, Hyde Park. It was also in conjunction with the bicycle gang. The guy that was running the place was also a bicycle aficionado. But in 1907, after 10 or more years of postcards, the government was convinced to allow people to write a message, because originally before 1907, you see the divided back on the left and the right. Up until 1907, you really weren't legally allowed to write a message. So people would cram it on the front of the card where the picture was if there was space. But after they passed a law, I can't believe it took a law to do that, but it did. And this, most of the time you see a little message on there saying authorized by Congress. So there was a law passed. But the card on the left, which I just showed how cards used to look before they had the divided back, that was actually mailed from the Chicago World's Fair. I just noticed the other night when I studied it more carefully. Okay, so what are people collecting cards? What do you decide? How do you decide what you like? Some people it's over the condition. Is the card bent, torn, water damage? And a lot of times you can use a card's image in a book or a presentation, but the card itself could be in shreds. So a lot of times people say, oh, the card's useless. I say, well, the image could be good, but it wouldn't be something you really collect in the sense of I'll buy this card because it's in great shape. The age of the card, like I said, the 1893 was the first U.S. picture postcard. I know in my hometown of Columbus, Georgia, which I have done a book on the postcards there, their first picture postcard was 1905, the same year my grandmother was born. So there were a lot of early picture postcards of things that by the time my grandmother grew up, they had already gone. The local features were gone and torn down by that time. The publisher, a lot of collectors go into the certain publishing companies, and some of them are very well known. If you get into going to the shows and buying things online or through dealers, you'll see they advertise certain types of publishers. Tux is a famous one out of England, and there are a lot of good categories like that. The stamp, when people mail me a card, I say when I want it mailed from the country, I don't like, one of my friends took a card from Switzerland to France to mail it. And I said, in my case, I want it mailed from the country with that country's stamp on it, legibly, and you put your name so I know who it is, because all my friends are traveling all the time, and they just say Jim, and you think, well, who in the world is that? So it's fun when you get older cards and people put a date on them. You have a good, clear postmark so you know what age it is. So the postmark's important. There's certain members of our club that collect just postmarks. They like certain postmarks, and I'm going to show a few of those here. And there are varieties in color. If you look at, like I studied Columbus, Georgia for my book, and you'll see that just one picture of the courthouse. And when I did the book 20 years ago, people thought I was doing an inventory of all the cards. I said, no, you could do a book on just the courthouse alone. There were so many different versions of printing and companies, because once the photograph has been made, but the postcard comes from, that photograph could be in public domain. And it's just sitting there for somebody else, some other company to use it. And so they could be numerous images, prints made of the same card, different color schemes and tints and stuff like that. Varieties of color. And I'm going to show you one example of how a postcard was actually printed, how you ordered a postcard. And of course, some people collect the messages. And one time we had a set of cards given to the Postcard Club that we did not keep together, but there was a lady, and her cards had ended up in the local library's collection. They got rid of it. And it was her boyfriend sent her a card every day saying things like, well, I tried to call upon you yesterday, but you didn't answer the door. And you realize when you read all the cards that this lady was playing really hard to get in 1912 and was never going to receive this guy. And so you sort of saw her whole saga when you looked through all the cards, and she had saved all the cards, and then unfortunately they became public domain. You can get books on postcards. This is one on U.S. postcards on the left, and the item on the right is actually a postcard magazine. I'm not sure any of these are being published anymore, but there was at one point a lot of magazines where you could buy cards from different publishers, and everything's online. This book is just about hotels, and we find there are certain books on postcards of gas stations or other kind of things, resorts, and because this is hotels, but there are a lot of books out there, but you have to sort of hunt them down. This is the slide about the card where we have I showed both sides of the card. It's Anderson County, South Carolina. It's the Anderson Courthouse. And this tells you that you had to order 1,000 cards if you turned in the photograph. So the minimum was $12.50 for 1,000 cards. Well, if you've got a store or something, you may not ever sell or give away 1,000 cards. So the courthouse might be a popular item locally, but it gave all the stipulations. That's the only time I've actually seen some of the stipulations about how they ordered cards. But I also used to work with historic preservation, so the architect who did this courthouse was Frank Milburn, and he did railroad depots around the southeast, and he also did county courthouses. And we have a copy of his little book of design. So he did the Anderson County Courthouse, and he did the one in Washington, Georgia. And that same design is used in Arkansas. He did one in every state, so hoping you weren't going to connect the dots. But in Washington, Georgia, that courthouse, Wilkes County burned back in the 50s. The top burned off. They didn't lose any records. So then in the 1980s, when they got ready to rebuild the roof, they went back to some of the postcard designs, because we had not only the one of that courthouse, but you had the one in Anderson, South Carolina, which was the exact same design. They went over there and measured everything and were able to rebuild that courthouse to the original specs and everything. So that's another use. You can make your own postcards up. This is a little kit I bought years ago. I guess you could find one of these somewhere now, but you can get a postcard back and just stick a photograph on it and create your own postcard. Of course, they make stamps that are specifically postcard value. The current value, I looked it up, we keep upgrading the postage all the time, so the current value is 56 cents to mail a postcard. And so you can buy specific postcard stamps if you ask the people nicely at the U.S. Post Office. What do people collect? As far as the people we know, they collect just about everything. But at a show, when we used to have these big shows where they'd meet at one of the hotels and have about 20 or 25 dealers, that's when you really saw how many different types of cards there were, and all over. We haven't had any shows in a long time because the dealers have all retired or died. So we hope to try to pull something together sooner than later, but there's just not that many people to pull from. There are a few dealers like in Huntsville, Alabama, and there's somebody that showed up in South Carolina this year, and we hope to get a few of those together maybe and have another show. You can have historic views, you can have whimsical views, you can have advertising views, and our club members often share when we have a meeting about what they collect. And it's amazing how many people have traveled all over the world now. And people will pull up a picture in a sort of a guessing game. Does anybody remember seeing this on their travels? And one of our members who died a year ago, he had been the son of missionaries. And so between growing up, going all over the world, he himself and his wife traveled all over the world and would send cards back and collect things. And you could always show something to Terry, and he would recognize it through some of his life's travels, which was really fun since most of us never went to any of those countries. He did. And I'm going to show you some of my personal interest. One is unusual places. This is a card that my pediatrician in Columbus, Georgia, Dr. Ray, who some of y'all know his wife, who used to live here in Decatur, Ann Ray, this is a card he got from Antarctica. She was always giving me their family travel cards, and then she later, when she downsized, gave me a lot of the cards she had sent her own children. But that's actually postmarked Antarctic territory, so that's pretty significant.
Was that printed? Is that real handwriting?
It's a printed handwriting, okay. But it's definitely got a postmark on it. That's the main thing. Yeah. Yeah, it's not, I mean, they didn't go to Antarctica for sure. You can get down there. You can go on a boat down there, get close to it. So I guess you could mail a card. The question is, would it be postmarked there? I'm going to show you another postcard that was mailed from a ship. And you'll see how confusing that card is in a minute. Okay, now on my travels, I lived in England for 2 years in the Air Force. So I found out the London subway system issued posters and postcards. So I have lots of posters of the London sites. And that's a postcard of the poster from Westminster Abbey. And then I did get to see the King Tut exhibit at the British Museum. So that's a postcard I bought at the King Tut exhibit in 1972 when it was there on the first time the King Tut mask left Egypt. And we have different topics. I used to collect the New Year's date. And I was going good, 1910, 12, 1913, 14. But when World War I hit, the postcards were all being printed in Germany. So when the war came, all the overseas printing and good designs and really engraved cards all stopped. And so after that, you don't see any really good dated New Year's type cards. So after 1914 or so, I didn't find any more. This is just the other cards, just a veteran, some memorial. One's a Civil War veteran, one's a World War I, or maybe Spanish-American War veteran. So then holidays. Back in the day, people would really send postcards for holidays. So you wouldn't actually buy a Valentine card. You would find a Valentine postcard. Now, I have a whole slew of Christmas postcards that people send as their family message. Some of them are printed. Like you get today, you might have a printed message. And some of them, you just sign your name on it. But a lot of things were done there back in the teens and 20s. And it sort of fizzled out maybe in the 30s when things weren't as pretty in the postcards. And that's an Easter card. Really, in the Postcard Club, we have a whole box of holiday cards if anybody really gets into holidays. We had one guy named Valentine, and he would always buy Valentine postcards about Valentine's Day. It's sort of his thing. And so when someone like that comes to the club, you say, oh, your lucky day. We have a whole box of postcards for Valentine's or whatever holiday. Anyway, then another thing is humor. And two of these are postcards. The one on the bottom is really an advertising card, but I thought it was really funny with a potato going down the street. But the top two are actually postcards that were actually mailed. And the one on the right was 1974. So some of these things that are outlandish humor still hang around a lot of times, especially when you go to some of these crazy resort places. They'll print some of these things up. And another topic is just popular icons. And the postcard on the left was what the U.S. Post Office sent out trying to pick the Elvis stamp a few years back. And you had to choose one of the designs. And I forget, I think the top one is the one that won out maybe for that first contest. I think they later used the lower design eventually. And on the right's one I picked up at the High Museum when they had a exhibit in 1990. So a lot of times you can commemorate your own travels and your own visits, your own the things you pick up as souvenirs. These are some unusual cards. Ladies today was bringing another kind of card, but this is the one on the left is the Sapelo Island Lighthouse in sort of a holograph, so it sort of moves around time. And then there's a metal one, I think that came from Arizona. And then the one on the lower right is the Fulton County Courthouse in sort of an embossed design. And that courthouse was built about 1914, so that has to be an early 20th century card. And I don't know if that was ever mailed or not. Some of these things are great ideas, but some of them don't go well in the mail. One that I didn't bring in, I couldn't put on the slideshow. This is the longest postcard I've ever seen. This was made by Fernbank Science Center of their dinosaur. They don't make it anymore, but this is the longest one I've ever seen. And I think I tried to mail one to my mother. The post office might say they would do it, but I don't think it ever traveled very far. And then, like I said, my topics have been World's Fair. So these are two, the 1933 Century of Progress at Chicago. And, at every World's Fair, something was introduced. So that was where the TV was introduced, 1933. And then on the right is the 1939 World's Fair. My mother went to the 39 World's Fair with her aunt and uncle. It's her high school graduation. And I'll show you a minute, because 25 years later, when I finished high school, my grandparents took me to the New York World's Fair in 1964. So I have a lot of memories and postcards from that. And of course, you always hope to mail some home from these. And I think we have some that mother, but one of my friends just recently cleaned out his parents' stuff. They've been dead forever, but he finally gave me all the World's Fair stuff they brought back from the 39 World's Fair. So people collect these kind of things, and then they say, well, what am I going to do with it? So luckily, I got to have it, and he didn't throw it away. And I said,
that New York 1939 World's Fair, that's the care. My parents were there.
Okay.
Greeting people and showing them air conditioning.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There were a lot of inventions shown there, and there were pavilions, at every World's Fair. In the early days, General Motors would have a pavilion, and Ford Motor Company in the foreign countries. In fact, in the 33 World's Fair, the coastal Georgia African American singers that are now a famous group, they came to Chicago's World's Fair. You can go into World's Fairs forever. We can do a whole lecture on just what's available from the World's Fairs. So one of the things I collect is Royal Family, and this is just something about when the Queen came to Jamestown in 2007. She'd also come in 1957 for the anniversary of Jamestown. So this is the kind of card that was issued. Of course, you didn't buy it at the time she was there, but you got it with the Queen's monogram and everything on it. Go back to the 1907 Jamestown Exposition, where the Georgia Pavilion, what was the Georgia Pavilion at the Jamestown World's Fair in 1907? It was in Norfolk, Virginia, and the house is still there. It's part of Norfolk Navy Base. It was a replica of Bullock Hall in Roswell. Because President Roosevelt, that was his mother's house, and he was president. He was coming to Norfolk for the Jamestown Exposition. So every now and then a famous home from Georgia would be used to be the Georgia Pavilion when the states had pavilions. So this postcard from Jamestown shows the original postmark, and then it's got the original logo, and it doesn't have a Jamestown stamp. They did issue a stamp for that expo. So the trifecta would be having the stamp, the postmark, and the logo. But this one only has 2 out of the 3. But it's still important. Then in 2007, they did issue postcards with the logo, and then they issued a stamp. That actually shows what you can, the commemoratives go on into the next category of stamps. This was a little sheet of stamps. They issued the triangular stamps because at that time it was the 300th anniversary, so they issued a stamp with 3 sides to it. Now this is the card I was telling. This was mailed to a friend of mine who was a travel agent. And since this time, she and her husband have moved into a retirement center, so they gave, through his sister, all their postcards. So we got 20-something thousand cards a couple of years ago from this couple. And when you come to a Postcard Club meeting, you people say, well, how are the cards organized? So prior to this donation, all our cards were organized by states and countries. So when we got their cards, we realized they were organized by cities, worldwide, alphabetical. So Cairo, Chicago, Cincinnati, everything was organized worldwide. So it's complicated to get your mind around 2 sets of the way we have cards set up. But there was no way we could rearrange them all. But anyway, this card has, the ship was headed to Curacao in the West Indies. And so that's where they were at destination. They're telling her in the card, because she's their travel agent, they're headed to Curacao. But the card has a Norwegian stamp. It was postmarked in Panama, and they were headed to Curacao. So it has all kind of combinations of mixed messages on there. So that's a real treasure that just happened to turn up in that collection of stuff that they, she just happened to have because she was a travel agent. Some cards turn up that need to be researched. A friend of mine was downsizing her collection. She was from Springfield, Tennessee, and this is like a sports team, the Ashland Merchants. And I did a little bit of research trying to figure out, it's about 1907 because it's a divided back. And there's still a team up there called the Ashland Merchants in the Ohio, Kentucky area. So the question is, what could we learn about this card? You could find your family stuff. You could give it to your local historical society and just say, y'all can figure it out. The archivist can figure it out down the road. what to do with it. But it's a great picture, and hopefully somebody else would have another version of it that they could help identify some of the people in it. But that's a sort of a fun little project that turns up every now and then. You can document recent visits. There's several cards from the Twin Towers, 9/11 disaster that I happened to have picked up. I did a lot of research when I was with the state of Georgia on Sapelo Island, and these are just two postcards from the 1930s when it was a popular spot. Mr. Coffin, who owned the island, most of the island, he would invite various wealthy people, like Lindbergh came to visit, and President Hoover and President Coolidge and others. And then I just had a photograph in there showing that the house looks pretty much the same now, even though it was built in the 20s, rebuilt in the 20s. So that's just one area. You don't find very many cards on Sapelo Island, maybe 10 total, if you find that many. And same thing with the other coastal island, like Cumberland Island. There are very few early cards, but they had hotels on Cumberland Island, so there are cards for Cumberland Island, just very few and far between. And these are just two documenting Georgia houses. The one on the left is very unusual. It doesn't tell us much. That oldest house in Atlanta. And this is way before the Tully Smith house became well known. So we don't know what this house is. And a lot of times you find places in other cities where they just say the oldest house, the oldest something or another. And you don't know whether that's just the local lore or whether there's any truth to it. And the lower right is Meadow Garden in Augusta, and that house is really one of the oldest houses in the 1790s, and the DAR took that over 100 years ago. That's the oldest house museum in Georgia because they took it over as a private group to run it, and they still own it now in Augusta, right on the canal down there. Some more Georgia cards. This is, of course, Rhodes Hall, back when it was the Rhodes home, now the Georgia Trust headquarters. A card of Jimmy Carter and then President Roosevelt's home, the little White House. And the one on the lower left is the most expensive card I ever paid, for $25. And I did a whole book on Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia, Fort Benning postcards and photographs. And this is a well-known photograph of President Harding coming to Fort Benning around 1920. Well, he died in 23, so he was there in 21 or 22. And I had no idea it had been made into a postcard. And I only found one. And if they made 1,000 cards, I only found one. So that's why to me it was worth $25 at the time I discovered it. I'd already done my book, and I knew the picture and knew exactly where it comes from. But it's the kind of thing you just never think about, there being a postcard made of it until it surfaces. The one thing about postcards is so fun, there's no finite list. With coins, you know what the mint published, and with stamps, you sort of know. But with postcards, you have no idea. I had one friend one time, his family ran a general store, and they never got rid of any of the postcards that they made for their store. And so he had like a whole box of probably over 1,000 cards back in the 1910s, and he had all of them. And they just never did anything. Maybe the store folded. So sometimes things jump on the market, like especially when some collection is sold and everything's put on the market, and things surface you've never seen before. This is some from Columbus, Georgia. Some of like the courthouse, I said there's a million different views of the courthouse. This is Dinglewood on the left. This is a historic house that recently went on the market. My sister was a realtor for that, and there were a couple of historic views of that, but it was always a private home. It was used as a boarding house for a while around 1910. And the mills are famous. Columbus's mills are still there, and they pretty much look the same. Right is the Oglethorpe Monument. That's one of these things, a local monument that's been moved around a million times. And that postcard surfaced after I did my book, so it was not in my book. These are my two books, Columbus, Georgia, and Vintage Postcards, and then Fort Benning, Images of America. That's the original edition. It was reprinted in 2018 for the 100th anniversary of Fort Benning. It has a slightly different cover with a banner across the top. But I've been very lucky. I've sold those, and the publisher sold 5,000 copies each, so it's been pretty good for 20 years. A lot of other club members and former club members have done cards on Georgia postcards. If you go to Arcadia Publishing, and they're in Charleston, but they're actually based in Mount Pleasant, you will see all the books that are available from all over the country. Not only their postcard series, but they have other history series. They're also in conjunction with the History Press. So they have a ton of things. If you're thinking about doing a book, there are a lot of examples. There are books they've done on interviewing people, restaurants in a certain city. They have all kind of topics they've done. As long as you can find a market for it, they will help publish your book. And it's no cost to you. It's just you got to prepare the stuff, but they provide all the stuff, and then they do the marketing. You have to, if you want to sell them yourself, you can. I've got some of mine here tonight, but the point is they will get it out. And you can see you can get little snippets of some of the books if you go to their website and you can look at the books they've done and get a little snippet of some of the things. So it's really sort of a neat company. They're still in business, so they're doing pretty good. Where would you find postcards in archival collections if you want to see what something like the Georgia Archives has a collection, but the Archives doesn't want to take any more cards. So we've offered to try to give them some of the club's good Georgia stuff, and they said, nope, didn't want any more. Georgia Historic Society in Savannah, they have a good collection, but they've also sold off some of their duplicates, which is okay. University of Georgia, local universities and colleges. I'm connected to Columbus State University down in Columbus, and that's where I'll be donating my postcards about Columbus and Fort Benning, but they already have a good collection, as does the museum in Columbus. Well, if you heard Rob Craig talk a year or so ago about postcards, he mentioned the Kurt Tyke archives at the Newberry Library in Chicago. And if you're doing any kind of reference project and you want to see if they've taken a picture or did a postcard on your project, you need to contact them because they have a lot of things that became postcards, but a lot of pictures that never made it to postcard status because they went out and took pictures that didn't get marketed. And local historical societies like here at the DeKalb History Center or the Atlanta History Center all have collections. Where to buy and sell. eBay, of course, is a great thing, and you can look there and find quite a bit. Local antiques, flea markets like Scott's Antiques, the Chambly shops have some cards. The biggest problem, a lot of these places like Kudzu here in Decatur, they just don't have everything organized. So if you go, you got a whole box full of stuff, and you have a lot of material. You may just find a few you won't. Sometimes they're better organized. You can come to our club meetings, where I just mentioned we're organized by state, country, or by city. And there are a lot of online dealers. So most of the dealers that used to have standalone shops are now all online and have auctions and things like that for the real rare stuff. Here's our club. We have begun in the 1970s. We now meet 12 times a year at the First Baptist Church of Decatur at the rear. The dues were going up in January to $20 a year to pay for our cost of moving to the Baptist Church. We will sponsor shows if we can ever get enough people to agree to be there. And maybe we just have some of our own stuff for sale, but we need to get some other people involved. If you come to a club meeting, the cards are 25 cents a piece. You don't care vintage or anything, 25 cents is the price across the board. And we also give advice to people that bring us their collection to give advice what to do with it, what should I do, how should I sell it, how should I market it. Or they may just give it to us. This shows us at our new meeting space in the Baptist Church, and it shows you the cards we have in our cabinet. We have 51 boxes of cards. We got plenty of cards to sell, so we need to have some people come and help buy some of them. The Baptist Church did send me this aerial view with a red area, sort of on the back side of the church is the door where we meet. And it's sort of like a secret meeting. We have a secret code. If you're a good member, we'll send you the secret code. If you've never been a member, you have to come to the door and call my cell phone. So this is what the sign on the door will say, come Saturday. The next meeting is Saturday, 11 o'clock. And you call my cell phone, we'll come let you in. Because we don't meet right inside the door. At our other location, we met right inside the door. And so you just knocked on the door and you could have a window and see you. But this one, you have to go down the hall. And that shows the door where we'll have the sign on the door. It has an awning over it now. They put the awning back up. It's always a chance the awning could be knocked down. I've got some handouts here, so I've got my address and email in the handout for those that don't know how to reach me. In the club, have a permanent collection, so we're not on archives. Every card we've got is up for sale. So if cards are given to us, they're going to be up for sale. If something were very rare and were given to us, we might donate it somewhere if it looked like something very unique. Like if somebody came in with a whole, say, 50 cards from Gwinnett County or something pretty scarce, we might give them to the Historic Society there rather than selling, but that has rarely ever happened. Sometimes when people have offered cards to us, if they're from a small community, we'll say, why don't you give your local cards to your local Historic Society in Pennsylvania or someplace like that, because they know that in Georgia there'll be no takers to them. Don't purchase cards. We just decided not to do that as a matter of course. Especially now we have too many cards, so we certainly don't need to purchase any. Okay, part of this talk is, the second piece of the talk is, I did this a few years ago, how to use postcards in your genealogy. So you can document your history, you and your ancestors. So this is a postcard that's made of Valley Forge. So if you had an ancestor there, you could post that. There's a ship here. A lot of people are interested in ocean liners, so if anybody has an interest in postcards of ocean liners, I have a whole slew of them that the Postcard Club got that nobody bought. So if anybody has an interest in those. And most of your ancestors probably didn't come on a nice ship like this, but it's just the kind of things you can put in your family history album. And because I went to the World's Fair, like I said, I have postcards of the World's Fair I went to. And this is when I went to the Carter inauguration. I went to 7 inaugurations. So this is a picture, of course, issued after the Carter inauguration. But I did see them walking down the street, Pennsylvania Avenue, at the time it happened. This is the card my parents had made. My dad was stationed in California for about 6 months before he went overseas in 1943. So this is Knott's Berry Farm. And if you go to these funny places where they had all kind of whimsical things, you'd put on costumes or you'd put on, we have other family pictures of Hot Springs, Arkansas, where they went out there in the early 19-teens and would push wagons around as if they were country farmers, when they really were farmers back in Georgia. So I don't know why they thought that was funny, but they did these things because they really came, they were only one generation removed from the farm. We got some pictures like that. And they even took my Civil War ancestor out there to Hot Springs to be that vacation. So there are very few places, very few people had time for a vacation, but that was Hot Springs. And because this is when my parents were, they were stationed right near Knott's Berry Farm. My dad was stationed in Italy, so actually in the middle of the war, when the war stopped in Italy, we have pictures of he and his Jeep in 19. This is not that picture, but we have a picture of him with his Jeep in front of the Coliseum. So he did do some kind of tourism even in the middle of the war, and he did go to Pisa he stayed overseas a whole 6 or 8 months before he came home. And so their pictures he took at Pisa from the top of the Leaning Tower. Our family had a connection down in Sarasota, so we used to go to the Ringling Mansion quite a bit. My great-uncle's house was just around the corner. So that was one of the places where I always went. And then, of course, the 1967 World's Fair that we went to, sort of our last family vacation. And you can document your family history with the hospital, postcard of the hospital you're born in, the schools you attended. Some of them have postcards. Certainly my high school does. The church, our church has a postcard. Of course, the courthouse, I've already shown you the family home. If you're well enough off, somebody made a postcard of your family home. You can have a business block showing where your family office might have been, or somebody worked, vacation spots, plenty of those. And in military service, these postcards all relate to Fort Benning, where a lot of guys were there and sent postcards home. I went overseas to England in 1971, so I have the first postcard I sent to my parents on the right there, and another one of London. And then my farthest east travels were to Athens, to Mycenae, near Athens, Greece, and that's a postcard I probably bought later. And I went to Napoleon's tomb in Paris, and then below that's the art exhibit that was there, not in the Louvre, but behind the Louvre in whatever they call that building, and George Latour. This is DeKalb County Views. We did do a postcard book here, I don't know how many years ago now, the previous directors, it's been about 20 years ago. And on the right is a house on Ponce de Leon. This was done by a local artist who lived up near Chastain Park, Mr. Bowers, but he did a lot of watercolor pictures, and some of y'all may remember Mammy Shanty, Aunt Fanny's Cabin, all those local iconic restaurants he did. We did motels, and I have a scrapbook here I brought of all the ones I bought for several states that he's done postcards in. But I did interview his children, and they didn't have much. We honor somebody for doing something great like that, but then they didn't think much of their dad because he'd never made enough money to support the family. So they didn't think much of his career as an artist. But he certainly is famous in the postcard world for doing these watercolors. That just had to be one on Ponce de Leon, a private home. So they must have gotten the original painting, but I never figured out who actually had that. And then I gave a talk a few years ago, and Mr. Sherian of Sherian Carpets down the street, he gave me that card. So that's, again, a private business card that they still have some. So clearly, if they had 1,000 made in the 30s, they still got some of them left. So that's why I had to really find this one the other night, because I showed this card, not where did I put it? Because I knew exactly the day I got it in 2018. It's the same week I had a wreck, so I knew when it was, but I did find it. So this is just some other DeKalb County views. That's Oglethorpe University, and another set of houses in the Druid Hills area. Then a couple of weeks ago, we had a lecture about the Weinkauf Hotel, and I had a bunch of postcards of the Weinkauf, and that just shows how they advertised that hotel. Of course, they didn't know it was going to burn up, and that's just one of the rooms that was there. So that was some of their advertising stuff. As I said, I collect World royal family memorabilia. And this was a card that had been given to me, the Queen's coronation painting, photograph. I was given that because of the stamp. So as a kid, I had a lot of stamps, and my grandfather's first cousin, she had been sent that from London in 1953, and for a long time it was in my stamp album, and I almost tore the stamp off. And then later when I turned it over and realized it was the coronation portrait, I was really excited. So it moved from one collection to the other. And you discover a lot of things that you had one reason to get them, and you may find another treasure. The other picture there is the hotel in Kenya where the Queen was the day she became Queen. And that was my college roommate went to Kenya in the Peace Corps, and he mailed that card to my brother. And that one, these things was sitting around, and I realized what that was and put that in the postcard collection. Sometimes you find cards of things that never were. This is an architect here, H. Kenneth Brown. He did a lot of the major buildings back in the 20s and 30s. I think he died in the 40s. Very well known. This was an advertising card he did. He was advertising the new City Hall in Atlanta. What's wrong with that card? He never built that city. The City Hall was built by another artist who also did postcards, G. Laurie Preacher. So Mr. Brown lost out, and that building is actually in Miami. You know, they didn't scrap their plans. They had to design the building, so he actually marketed it to another city, so it's actually in Miami.
Why would they make postcards of a rendering?
Well, he advertised. That's his, that's another subset is postcards with architects' names on them. And, they're ones of the Fulton County Courthouse, which is 1914. This same guy actually did the courthouse earlier. And so, yeah, he was marketing. That's just what they did. Now, again, got about maybe 15 of those. They're scarce because, if you didn't get the contract, you probably didn't do well with the postcards. And then these are some burial cards. This is one of Patterson's funeral home. And I just wonder, Spring Hill, what would you have said if you mailed that to somebody? You wouldn't say, wish you were here. So what would you do? So this is the lower picture is New Orleans above ground burials, which is always an interesting thing. There are a number of New Orleans cemeteries like that. The cemetery on the lower right is in French, and I don't know where it is. I don't know. I just had that card. I thought it was interesting looking. The symbols on the graves could be Jewish. I don't know. It just has a lot of, it's interesting. And there's nothing on the card that really explains where it is, and there's no postmark apparently. The upper right picture is Marshal Foch's grave. It's in the same tomb as Napoleon's tomb in Paris. It's just on the lower level. So it's an interesting grave showing the pallbearers carrying his coffin, and that's how his memorialized there, but that's an interesting grave. Where are these? Does anybody know? Well, that's the New York subway. And that's an interesting card. Send somebody a picture of the New York subway. But the upper one, does anybody know where that is? Metro Atlanta. It's not here anymore. It's Cox College, which was in College Park. But it's not why the College Park was named, but it happened to be built there. And it was a school up until the 30s, 40s. And so I have a lot of postcards of that. It was just back in... Yeah, back in the day, go to College Park, there's a big open space, and that's where the thing was. But I mentioned this in my genealogy column one time, and I had a lot of ladies write me letters about having gone there to school. So just one of those things that gave you an example, to get people to write about what they did. So I've got a whole collection of that to donate at some point. This is something I found in my collection of the night. It's a birth announcement. Again, that's another use people did cards, and this was 1914, and I thought it was really interesting. This little kid's name was on there, and I figured out his name, and looked him up on Ancestry, and he only lived 9 months. It was real sad. And so after I figured out what happened to him, I went to find a grave, and they had posted a find a grave entry for him, but there was no monument, no tombstone. So I did post that postcard on this find a grave site the other night. I felt like it's the least you could do. But I thought it was going to be an interesting story, but it turned out to be sort of a sad tale.
What's the date? What was the date?
1914, and he died in 1950, and he wasn't a year old when he died. His parents did have other children, but they were younger than him, so they would have never met him, according to Ancestry. Now, these are just 2 African-American images. A lot of the African-American images are derogatory, watermelon eating and all kind of things, so they don't sell well. A lot of people won't touch them. The club has a few of those that we have in reserve in case somebody comes along that's willing to buy them without marketing. So those are just 2 I found. And the one on the left is really It's before 1907. It's a very old card, playing a game on the sidewalk. And then, of course, turpentine. In the old days, turpentine coming out of pine trees, had to be scraped off. And I did a booklet about turpentine in Georgia back in the 70s. One of the things I did in my office. And I had no idea how turpentine was harvested. And even my grandmother knew more than I did. And she said, it's out of pine trees. The sap is out of, that's why you do a publication, because you learn a lot by doing that. These are some postcard views I turned up that, you see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but this shows you the whole complex and how it's really right downtown Pisa. And so many times you just have one historic building isolated and you don't realize what else is right there. And of course, there are other churches, because the Pisa is just a tower associated with the church, the basilica, whatever they call it there. And on the right is the Acropolis in Athens. And I had been there, and, it's right there in the middle of town. It's not like out in the boonies somewhere. These last ones here, this is Oxford College in England, and I was stationed near Cambridge, and they did the same thing for Cambridge. They did a postcard of all the colleges, because the universities over there have all the different colleges, have their own degrees and all, and they have ancient history associated. This hotel is called the Cliff House, and if you look at it, it's really on the cliff, and you wonder, would you really want to stay there? It's in California. Would you really think you're going to fall off into the water? And this other one's a lady with the big hat, and they call her the Merry Widow's hat for some reason. I don't know what that means, but there's a lot of fun things you can discover. And sometimes you just buy a card because it intrigues you, and you don't have any other reason. I did go to the Titanic exhibit here the other day out in Duluth on Beaufort Highway, and they have some of the original postcards. The Titanic didn't just go off and sink. It went from England to France and then to Ireland before it took off out in the ocean. So there were people from the Titanic. This is a replica. The top one is a replica too. And but anyway, at the exhibit they issue sort of a little passport-looking postcard. It's found is from previous exhibit, not the current one. And of course, we got Thanksgiving coming up. These are some Thanksgiving cards that I found. And then we've just had Veterans Day and the election. So in the old days, they would do a lot more, patriotic stuff on Veterans Day with postcards. And we'll end with just greetings from Georgia. So
I have that one on.
Do you?
Yeah, like on my file cabinet.
Well, good. Oh, that's the talk. I brought some show and tell. We've got a membership form here and a postcard information. And then I did a calendar. This is something if you got postcards and you want to something. I did this at Kinko FedEx, I guess. But I have postcards in color from my book, and it's just great pictures in it. This with postcards down in the brain. Purchasing this was what it's a recipe from a cruise ship, and that came in a bunch of the day, but it's a menu. But so the post for sale. This is my book on just about. You look through those, and then what I remember saying, she brought her album to show you some different. Mostly. Okay, now we open for questions, if there are any questions.
The questions, since she had written down.
Well, y'all are welcome to come to our meeting, or if anybody wants to put their name and address in, y'all can have those sheets. You're the only ones here that are not doing these. And since this is going to be put online, I'll invite anybody that listens to it online to get in touch with the club. You see my email there, and if you're willing to get in touch, we'll get back with you. And if you have postcards you want to have the club evaluate for you or help you find someone that might give you an evaluation, we'll be glad to. Club will be glad to help you connect the dots on that. So we do that quite a bit. There are not that many dealers that will purchase things, but they certainly give you advice. And welcome to bring your stuff to the club meeting, and the club members will tell you their thoughts. We have gotten a new dealer who lives in Athens. There's one new guy that's surfaced, so he's also joined the club.